What's up guys, Captain Blade J52 here with another one of our proof of concept tanking videos where we're going to be taking certain tanks or certain ships that people may not traditionally see as being a viable tank ship, and we're going to slap a build on it and see how well it does or doesn't do, so to speak. Now, I want to thank everybody that stuck with me through the content drought up until now. I've not been able to get as much out there as I wished I could have for you guys. Like I say, just sometimes life happens. I don't get as much as I want done for you guys. But anyways, also if I sound like poo, it's been raining a little bit here. Still caught a snow flurry here or there, so allergies have been giving me grief in that department. So I apologize in advance if I sound like crap. But those of you out there that have allergies, you probably know you probably know that feeling. Hopefully not, though. But anyways, continuing on with this particular series, we have one of our Vorgon ships here today that we're going to be using. This is the Vorgon Tijara. I'm not really sure how you pronounce that name, and I'll guarantee you I just butchered it. I'm not even going to pretend that I pronounced that correctly. And this is actually one of the more controversial ships in the game, even by today's standards. Now, at the time of filming this, this is the only ship in game to have a 3-5 layout. Now, for those of you that were here when this ship released, you already know about this. But for those of you that are coming in after the fact, or maybe you still have the project and you've just not completed it, or you've not really took the ship out for a spin, if you do have it, then you guys didn't, your ears weren't playing tricks on you. It's actually a 3-5 layout. And you can actually see it down here in the little weapons area, or if we bring our character page back up. So you can see here, 3 weapons in the front, 5 weapons in the rear. Now, what made that so controversial is because up until that point, if there was an imbalance in the weapons, basically meaning there were more weapons on one facing than the other, there was almost always more weapons in the front than there had been in the rear of the ship. This is the first ship in game to have more weapons in the rear than it did in the front. Because up until that point, we'd seen the traditional 4-4 layout for a lot of ships. We'd seen 4 3s, 5 2s, 5 1s in the case of the Baltimore Raider. We'd seen a couple of 4 2s in the cases of some of the other Raiders. We'd seen 3 3s, which is more traditionally associated with science ships. And point being, it was, if you had seen a ship up to that point, if it was going to have more weapons on one side than the other, it was always the front. They always had more weapons in the front than they did the rear. And because of the different layout of this particular ship, it caused a lot of controversy when it was released. And, at least that I could see anyway, this is one of those type of ships that you either love it or you hate it. There's not really a middle ground that I've ever seen for this particular ship. And, some people say, oh, it sucks, it's not that great, and some people's like, oh yeah, mine layer, which is actually what I thought when this came out, that it'd make a really great mine layer. And I've actually got a mine layer build that I'm going to have to show you guys a little bit later on the channel sometime down the road, if you guys are interested in seeing that. But it actually did a lot better than I was expecting. I have to say that much. But anyways, for this particular ship, we're going to look at our gear, we're going to look at our layout, and then we're going to take a look at how she actually performed in our Beta Thar and our Chapori runs. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that I'm actually filming this intro and the final thoughts a little bit after the fact. You guys will actually be able to see that the runs were actually filmed before our personal endeavors were released, a little bit before then, and we're now filming this a bit after the fact. Like I say, I've been kind of slacking a little bit on getting this stuff up there for you guys. But that's the only major difference you guys are going to see, so I did want to make that clear to you folks. But anyways, looking at our weapons, we'll start there, and then we'll go pretty much down the ship. Now, we have 2 of our Tetrion beam arrays up front, as well as our advanced Tetrion, or advanced diffusive Tetrion torpedo launcher. Now our beam arrays are pretty much your standard Tetrion beam arrays. These are the DMG4 variants that I'm using at the moment, at least for this particular build. I got kind of lazy with re-rolling a couple of the mods, so think nothing of that, hopefully. But as far as our diffusive Tetrion torpedo goes, now what makes this special is my veteran players will know exactly what this is, hopefully right away, where some of my newer players may be new to the concept of energy torpedoes. If you hear a veteran player or somebody mention an energy torpedo, they're talking about something similar to this, whether it be the crystalline torpedo, whether it be, I think the Agony torpedo is a energy torpedo, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure somebody will correct me on that in the comments. Or whether it be the morphogenic torpedo, or perhaps even the diffusive Tetrion torpedo we have here. Now, it behaves like a torpedo, it fires like a torpedo, it hits similar to a torpedo, except instead of dealing kinetic damage, it deals energy damage. So if you have anything that boosts your directed energy damage, it will also boost this torpedo. And if you have anything that boosts torpedoes, it will also boost this as well. So the energy torpedoes are kind of that odd mixture that can double dip into the best of both worlds. So instead of dealing kinetic damage, this is going to deal Tetrion. Now this is going to apply two things, potentially. It's going to apply the shield diffusion to self, and to your target as well. It's going to debuff your target for a -10 shield resistance, or 10% shield resistance, and it's going to buff you by that same 10% shield resistance. And then it also has a chance to apply protomatter radiation, which is a radiation burn for up to 15 seconds, which can ignore 80% of the target's shields. So it could be a very potent thing in this aspect. Alright, sorry I had to pause the recording for just 1 second there. A pussycat was trying to get in the room, as pussycats sometimes do, but love the little critters to death, though. But anyways, continuing on, we're looking at our weapons. So for our rear end of the ship, we have 4 more beam arrays in the back, as well as our Tetrion turret. Now, 3 of our arrays are pretty much your standard Tetrion beams in this instance. You can see they do the shield drain, as well as you can see one of our duty officer effects we'll take a look at momentarily. Then we have our diffusive Tetrion beam array in the rear arc of the ship. This is going to do pretty similar to our diffusive Tetrion torpedo, except minus the protomatter radiation potential. And what is so special about this also is, of course, the shield diffusion. It's going to debuff enemy shield resistance as well as buffing yours. Then finally we have our heavy biomolecular Tetrion turret. This comes from the 8472 Counter Command Tier 6 reputation, and it also gives a 2% Category 2 bonus to this weapon for reaching Tier 6 on the Counter Command rep. So that's going to start you off with a little bit more damage than this weapon otherwise might normally have. So that is very, very nice, and this is going to apply to any weapons from the Counter Command rep that you're going to get. So they are going to get a bit of a bonus. Now for our particular turret here, this is one of the newer turrets that came about as a result of Tier 6 rep. The 2 alternate energy types that Counter Command got were Tetrion and Plasma. So there is a Plasma variant along with this as well. Now as far as the abilities go, it's basically the same abilities you're used to seeing from the Phaser turret and the Disruptor turret, except in this case it's a Tetrion flavor. So you can see it's going to give a bit of accuracy, a bit of critical chance in this instance. It's going to give the standard Tetrion proc that can drain a bit of the shield stall facings. But the biggest thing here is it's going to give the biomolecular incubation. Good luck saying that 10 times fast. It's going to debuff the enemy flight speed a little bit for 8 seconds, as well as dealing a radiation damage that's going to ignore shields upon expiration, and is going to deal double that damage to Undine. So very nice. It can pop a radiation damage, or it can just deal standard Tetrion damage. Now this is going to be tied in to a 2-piece bonus that we're going to look at in a minute. And similarly, this is why we're waiting on our deflector and our other stuff, because of some of the set bonuses that they deal with. So we'll examine them in just a minute. Now for our devices, we have 4 device slots. I usually think of devices as personal preference. There is no set in stone best winner-take-all device that you can use. There's some very nice ones that I will recommend, however. One of which is our red matter capacitor that we have here. You can pick this up if you had a code for the red matter capacitor originally, or now you can pick them up out of the Phoenix prize packs for I think it's a very rare token they come on. So not too terribly hard to get. They give a plus 25 to all power levels for 30 seconds. And then we have the energy amplifier, which is going to give a 20% Category 2 weapon damage or energy weapon damage bonus for 20 seconds. Now, for those of you that, for my veteran players, you may already know what this is. But for some of our newer players out there that may not understand the difference between what a Category 1 bonus and a Category 2 bonus is, a Category 1 bonus is something that will give benefits to your base damage, similar to your tactical consoles. Those are almost always Category 1 bonuses. And they'll say something like, plus, in this case, plus 34.5% beam weapon damage. And I'll touch base more on these tactical consoles in just a moment. But if you see something like that, where it says just plus a certain percentage, that is typically a Category 1 form of that boost. If you see something like this that says plus 20% bonus, when it says bonus, that typically signals that it is a Category 2 buff, meaning that it comes in after the fact. And it doesn't buff strictly just your base, it buffs everything. So when it says 20%, it truly means a 20%, and not just 20% of your base value. Then, looking at our consoles here in just a second, like I say, for your devices, there's plenty of options that you've got. These aren't the only ones you can use. You can use maybe subspace field modulator, Javanite hardpoints, ablative, some of the ablative stuff that they have out there. It's really personal preference. You can mix and match for what works best for you. These are just some of the ones I have found pretty good success with. Now for our console layout, we have 5 engineering, 3 science, 3 tactical. Now our tactical consoles are the easiest ones to go over, so we'll touch base here first. Now I am using the plus beams because I do a lot of testing with different energy types and different ships. I traditionally use a lot more beam array type of weapons than I do cannons or otherwise, so I like to have a set of these laying around. Now you are going to get a bit more damage out of them by specializing to your specific energy type. So in this case I would use Tetrion locators here normally, but I just kind of wanted to throw this build together to show that, hey, it is indeed possible. And even then, it's still giving a pretty decent chunk of damage to our beams. Now the other reason we're using the locators here, for your tactical consoles, typically you want to make sure they're a vulnerability locator or a vulnerability exploiter at this point in time. Reason being is your locators will give you a bit of critical chance, or your exploiters will give you a bit of critical severity. If you can't use locators or you don't have access to them yet, then I would advise getting exploiters. That way you're at least getting a little bit of something extra. Now the only times you really don't want to use a more specialized tactical console like this is if, say, you need to complete a set bonus. Like the morphogenic Polaron set is a really good one that people have started using, and that I get a lot of damage out of myself, actually. And it requires you to use a tactical console in that instance. But otherwise, aside from instances like that, I prefer typically to stick with locators or exploiters, or perhaps even the colony tactical consoles that I managed to pick a few up of. But anyways, did kind of want to touch base on that. Now, getting into, we'll go up here, we'll start with our science consoles. Now, our first science console we have is our Temporal Disentanglement Suite. This is one that is standard on quite a few ships, actually. DPS users and tanks alike typically like this particular console. It's going to give a little bit of aux power, so that's nice. Free power, never going to sneeze at that. Then we have our shield capacity. This is going to give us 26.2% additional maximum shield capacity, which is always nice. This can potentially let us tank a few larger hits because we're going to have extra shields to soak those hits up. But it's not good to rely strictly on shield capacity and stuff alone if you have no ability to replenish that. But that's another debate for another day. Then it also gives a bit of critical chance and critical severity based on your aux power. The higher your aux is, the more benefit you're going to get. Then you also get a bit of shield damage resistance. So that's a pretty good thing to have. This is one of those consoles that it kind of touch bases in more than strictly one area. You can argue the aux power is going to help a little bit for healing because of some of your science-based heals, such as maybe a hazard emitters or science team or something along that route. But this is a very great console. It's going to give you some good threat gen and a good bit of damage negation as well. So that's what we're going to... one of the reasons why we have it here. Next we have our hydrodynamics compensator. This is going to complete the 2 set with our bimolecular turret. We'll look at that set bonus in just a minute. Now this particular console is one that I ordinarily wouldn't run except to complete the set bonus. In this case, is going to be a bit of a damage increase. I can go ahead and preview that a little bit for some people. Those of you that may be familiar with it will already know. Those of you that are newer to it are going to see that in just a minute. Now this particular console, it's kind of bland on its own in my personal opinion. I know that may not be a very popular opinion, but it's my opinion nonetheless. For our flight turn rate, this is what we have here. It gives a little bit of flight turn rate, which is nice, so it's basically, in my opinion, a souped up RCS console. It's not bad, but there's other stuff out there that's going to give you more benefits, in my personal opinion, than strictly this. So this is completing our 2 set. Otherwise, personally, I probably wouldn't consider this too much unless I just needed something to fill the slot. But anyways, continuing along, we have our protomatter field projector, which comes from our Lucari Dorito ship. This is actually a very potent console. It's going to give a bit of shield healing and hull healing as the passive bonuses. Then whenever you activate it, for you and any allies within 3 kilometers, you gain 392.3% shield regen and 430% hull regen, both of those being able to be buffed by shield restoration and hull restoration. And this is on a 2-minute recharge. So this is a very potent heal, and the reason a lot of people use this is because of the significant regen that it gives, and it doesn't affect just you. So if you're in an objective or in a mission where you have an objective to protect a certain ally, such as a ship or perhaps a starbase or some kind of a station that you need to keep alive, some of those objectives like that can be healed. Some of them can't. So for the ones that can anyway, such as say a starbase and a starbase fleet defense, if the starbase starts to dip low, you could pop the protomatter field projector, and that will actually heal that starbase from nearly dead, if not outright all the way back to full, depending on how damaged the base was previously. Then we get into our tachyokinetic converter. This is going to, I know I'm kind of moving a little faster through, well, faster for me anyway, I should say, through some of these consoles. But we have here our tachyokinetic converter, which is going to be a bit of control expertise for us, which is going to improve the pull of our gravity well and similar type of powers. We get a bit of flight turn rate, which is going to basically be sort of like an RCS type effect for us. Then we have a bit of critical chance and severity. So it's basically a assimilated module and a RCS console slammed into one thing. Then we have, if I can words, our binaural infusion circuits, which is going to give us some hull capacity, control expertise, and a very significantly large chunk of critical severity. It's going to give us 26.2% crit sev, which is currently the highest amount of critical severity you can get off of a single console at the time of filming this in-game. The next thing we have is our Regenerative Integrity Field, which comes from the Kobali Samsar. This is going to give a very nice chunk of Category 1 hull healing bonus. It's also going to give a nice burst heal up front, with that initial heal being a lot larger as you start dipping lower in health. So that 13,000 is going to get a lot bigger as my HP decreases. Then I also receive 100% of my directed energy damage as healing for 10 seconds. Can trigger up to 5 times a second. Now, that tooltip can be slightly deceptive because there is a cap on the console. There's a minimum of 558.5 hull restored and a maximum of 4467.9. So to put that into perspective, you're looking at about 23,000 hull healing per second, assuming you get all 5 procs. And then assuming you get all of the procs in that 10 seconds, you're looking at about 50 procs, assuming I did my math correctly. So you're looking at about 50 procs, and in total you're looking at a little over, or a little shy actually, of about 225k healing. I don't have the exact math in front of me, but that's the rough numbers. Assuming everything goes according to plan, you get the maximum procs and the maximum healing. And that's not counting the initial burst heal. So this can pull your rear end out of the fire if you have this console. The next thing we have is our Dynamic Power Redistributor module. This particular console is one that is actually pretty heavily desired by Federation players and non-Federation players alike. It's one of those rare consoles that actually gives a bonus to all 3 areas. It gives good damage negation, good damage recovery, and good threat generation at the same time. It gives 11.3 all damage resistance rating as passive, as well as 19% directed energy damage. So that's a good bit that it's going to give you there. Now, the activated bonuses that this gives are fairly significant. While you're above 80% hull, you get a 40% bonus energy or a bonus damage. You also get 100 bonus damage resistance rating and a 500% hull regen boost. Now, if you drop below 80%, you still keep the other boost, and if you go back above 80% while the effect is still active, you will regain that bonus damage. So this is one of those consoles that is going to benefit you in all 3 areas. Whether you're a damage dealer or whether you're a tank alike, this is something that when used at the right time can be a game changer. The next console we have is the Harasser probes. This is one that's going to, it actually comes off of, I believe, the Vorgon Escort, if I'm not mistaken. But it can be used on any Vorgon ship, and in this instance it's going to give us 25% Tetrion energy weapon damage, as well as 8% critical severity. So that's mainly why we have it on here, is sort of a stat stick. The probes themselves are kind of nice, but more so for the stats is why we wanted this particular console. So in a way, it's kind of a 4th tactical console, if that makes sense to you guys. Now, getting into some of our set bonuses. We're going to start with our Kobali set, because this is going to be very, very significant. No, actually, we're going to look at our weapon set first, because it's going to take a lot less time to explain. Now, if we look at our biomolecular turret and our console, you can see here we've got the biomolecular instability. Now, this is going to be a 7.5% bonus to phaser, disruptor, plasma, and Tetrion energy damage. And that's always going to be active, no matter what. So you're going to get that damage no matter what you do. And then you have a 2% increased chance for the biomolecular weapons to apply their incubation debuffs, which we went over a little bit earlier. So basically a 7.5% Category 2 bonus is why we have this on here. And that's a fairly significant bonus, 7.5% Category 2. That's more than some of the Category 1 buffs you may see on other effects. Now officially, we're getting into our Chapori set. Now, the deflector is, like most deflectors, what you see is what you get. This one just happens to have a lot of healing type effects to it. Our Hyper Impulse engines, again, kind of what you see is what you get. Except in this particular instance, this also has a cooldown reduction to hull and shield healing bridge officer powers, which increases as your engine power level increases. So you can get a minimum of 3% up to a maximum of 10.5% cooldown reduction on those healing effects. Now, I personally wish these were combat engines instead of Hyper Impulse, because I fly a lot more cruisers. It's the only real downside to Hyper Impulse engines if you're somebody that flies a lot more cruisery type ships. I guess I might have kind of invented a new word there, I don't know. Then for our shields, we have the Chapori Regenerative Shield Array. This is going to increase incoming hull healing to self by 10%, as well as giving a resolve for a 10% energy damage reduction to your shields. So, no matter what energy type you come up against, this is going to provide you some bit of damage reduction to it. And this is one of the reasons why I love shields that have resolve mods on them or baked into the shield. So that no matter what, you're going to be able to take some of the damage off no matter who you're fighting. That's just, to me, that's a lot more versatile than specializing into certain energy types. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just, to me, I think it's possible to over-specialize in this game. Now, as far as our skills go, now, I'm using a slightly modified skill build compared to what I might normally recommend to some of you. This is what I'm using for the space skills. I'm not going to go into them in great detail because I'm going to have a video for anybody that's looking for that's looking for a more technical, in-depth explanation of why I picked the certain skills that I did. For those of you that maybe just want to copy a build, you can see I've got the hull capacity and shield capacity, 2 points, 3 into energy weapon training, 1 into shield and hull restoration each, 2 points into improved EPS flow, 3 points into advanced impulse expertise, because I fly a lot of big bulky cruisers, 2 points into control and terrain expertise each, 2 points into targeting expertise and defensive maneuvering, all 3 points in our hull platings, 2 points into improved shield hardness, 3 into weapon amplification and specialization, 1 point defensive tuning, 1 point offensive tuning, all 3 points in long-range target sensors, all 3 points in hull pen. We have also 1 point in warp core potential, 2 in engineering readiness, and 2 into tactical readiness. Now again, I'm not going to go into great details as to why I picked each one of those. That's going to be in a separate video for you guys. Now, the one thing I will consider mandatory here at the bottom is you have a choice between hangar weaponry or threat control. If you're wanting to be a tank, the threat control, in my opinion, is mandatory, because that's free threat generation without you having to do anything while you're in threatening stance. As far as your specializations, they're, in my opinion, personal preference. Some of the ones I found great success with, however, are the intelligence that I've kind of swapped over to as of late, and also your strategist secondary. And the strategist or strategist, however you prefer to pronounce it, gives a pretty nice taunt ability, which can pull your butt out of the fire or pull friends' butts out of the fire, depending. Next, we have our personal space traits, as well as our starship traits and so on. Now, for our personal space traits, since we're running a tactical character, we have a good day to die, which basically means I can use my go down fighting at any hull level. which is going to be a damage decrease as well as a damage increase for me. I have my R&D crafting trait of Beam Barrage, which is going to be extra beam damage for me while my Fire at Will is active. I have one of my money traits, which is Context is for Kings, which it's either going to give me a Category 1 bonus, or not Category 1, a Category 2 1% bonus all damage if I've not been shot in the past 10 seconds, or if I have been shot, it's going to give me a +3 all damage resistance rating increase. So that's something that we have there. Then we have the Fleet Coordinator for free damage based on how many people are in my party. I was also using Helmsman at the time with this. So we have a 10% flight turn rate as well as cooldown reduction on evasive maneuvers. We have Last Ditch Effort, which is going to be a damage resistance when I use Go Down Fighting. Point Blank Shot, which is going to be a Category 2 bonus damage based on the distance to the target, up to a 6 kilometer maximum. Maximum bonus when at less than 2 kilometers, no effect beyond 6 kilometers. So you kind of want to be in sort of that butter zone, I guess. Then we have Redirected Armor Plating. Whenever I get shot from behind or the sides, I get a 30 all damage resistance rating boost for 5 seconds. Repair Cruise. I can stack that up to 5 times and get up to a 25% hull repair rate and a 25 all damage resistance rating. Then finally we have our superior version of Beam Training for 7.5% bonus beam weapon damage. Now here we have our redirecting arrays, which is comes off of our Tucker. As I get shot while Fire at Will is active, it increases the duration of the power. Our attack pattern Delta Prime, which is a stacking buff while my Delta is active and I'm getting shot at whenever I'm hit. I get potentially up to 15% critical chance and 37.5% severity for the 5 seconds. That's once it's stacked up to all 10 times. Then I have my Weapon Emitter Overdrive, which is whenever I'm using a cannon or beam ability for 20 seconds, it increases the weapon power drain by 50%, so it is a bit of a downside to it. And it gives me an additional 10% critical chance to my directed energy weapons and a plus 50 accuracy. The other trait we have is our emergency weapon cycle that comes off of the Arbiter. Now the first thing that this does is a minus 50% weapon power cost for 30 seconds. So when running that with our Weapon Emitter Overdrive, the power increase and the power decrease are going to wash each other out. But you're still going to maintain the critical chance and the accuracy. Now, the other thing that emergency weapon cycle gives you is 20% firing cycle haste for your weapons for 30 seconds. Basically allowing you to get more shots, more threat gen, and of course more damage. Now, our final trait is History Will Remember. This is one thing that each time a new foe damages you while you're on the map, and this can stack up to 30 times, it'll grant a particular buff. It will grant 1% all damage, 1% hull regen, and 1% maximum hull, and 10% threat generation while in threatening stance. And this will stack up to potentially 30 times, and will persist until you leave the map. So you're potentially looking at 30% all damage, 30% regen, 30% maximum hull, and 300% threat gen while in threatening stance. This comes off of the Tier 6 Narendra, and like ships for the other factions. So this is one that is going to be a very good choice for you guys, and one I would almost consider mandatory if you're wanting to tank, because this is going to guarantee a large chunk of threat generation. For space reputations, we have our Precision, which is, now I'm looking at the rank 2 versions of the powers, because I've gotten to Tier 6, but this is going to give you free critical chance. It's going to be active all the time. Advanced target systems for free severity. Energy refrequencer, which in my case is going to give me a 12.5% of my outgoing damage as hull healing This is always going to be active. It can trigger up to 5 times per second, capped at 597.5 base healing per trigger. Now, this may not be much in a single activation, but over time, the longer it goes, it's going to add up per second to be a little bit more than a Hazard Emitters 3, even, for me. And if the run is long enough, this can be one of my highest heals, if not the highest healing powers. Next we have our Aux Power Offense, which is bonus all damage and a little bit of Aux Power level. And that's, or not bonus Aux Power, bonus accuracy rating based on our Aux Power. I spoke a little bit there. And then we have our Magnified Firepower from our Gamma Rep, which is a 6.3% bonus weapon damage. Just for having it on, you're going to get that damage boost. For active reputations, the 3 ones for space that matter. It's our Anti-Time Entanglement Singularity. It's a physical AoE damage and slow for the target, and can be boosted by anything that buffs an exotic effect, so Control Expertise or Exotic Particle. Then we have our Biomolecular Shield Generator, which is going to give a bit of shield restoration as well as shield resistance, so basically damage reduction. Then we have our Quantum Singularity Manipulation, which is going to give a rather large boost to science stats for 8 seconds, and also give a temporary cloaking effect. So that's a pretty potent power. To get a bit more bang for your buck, pop any exotic buffs you may have first, throw Quantum Singularity, then try to group as many up as you can and drop your anti-time on it to get a bit more damage. Something I always like to recommend to people. Then for your duty officers, let's pull this up really quickly. Now, some of these may be harder to come by for some people, depending. Now, I like to use the Emergency Con Officer from the Phoenix boxes now, and whenever you activate Emergency Power to Engines, it will drastically decrease the cooldown on your evasive maneuvers. If you have an Emergency Power to Engines and your evasive maneuvers is down, you pop this. This is pretty much going to guarantee it's almost outright going to restore it every single time. So I recommend picking him up. He's not going to be too hard to pick up from the Phoenix boxes. The next officer I have is a Critical Severity Duty Officer. He's going to increase my critical severity when I fire energy weapons. I have a ZMOC, which is going to reduce cooldowns for Beta, Delta, and Omega attack patterns. And then in this instance, I have 3 copies of a Dakukan on here. Now, I ran 3 copies of a Dakukan and whatnot, mainly because a lot of the ships I've been flying, especially the Juggernaut, some of them don't have Attract Fire, and this kind of makes up for that. Your Dakukans are going to increase the amount of threat generation you do while your Delta is active by plus 100 threat gen per copy. So that's what I did want to mention as far as duty officers go. Now obviously there are alternatives if you can't get a hold of these, but this is what I'm using for this particular build. Now for our bridge officer powers, getting into this, I know I've went a lot longer with this than what I really wanted to as far as explanations and stuff. Now for our bridge officer powers, how we're going to best take advantage of this is, in my opinion, the setup that we have here. Now, we're going to start with our engineering seat. This is our commander engineering station, and what we're going to be using here is our engineering team 1. This is going to heal our hull a bit and purge any engineering debuffs, such as a viral matrix. Emergency power to engines. This is going to give us a bit extra flight speed, a little bit of turn rate, and power to our engines. So a bit of get the heck out of Dodge whenever you need it type of thing. Then we have our emergency power to weapons. This is going to give a very large category 2 boost to our energy weapon damage. It's going to give a large chunk of weapon power. and it's also going to activate our emergency weapon cycle. So that's something good to have there. Now, it is possible to rotate the power to weapons and power to engines, so you have both of them up all the time. But you don't necessarily have to do that, though it is something I recommend you consider. Then we have our reverse shield polarity 3, which is going to recharge our shields based off of incoming damage, and also make us immune to teleports for the 20 seconds. So this is kind of an oh crap, I need to get my shields back up type of power. So if you're getting hit by a large amount of damage, pop your reverse shield polarity, and you should be able to stay up for quite some time. Now, one little trick I will teach you guys is it is possible to restore all 4 of your shield facings, even if you're only getting hit off of one side using this power. If you're only getting hit on the one side, keep hitting your distribute shields. That'll start throwing power into your other shield facings and recharge the facing that it's being taken from. So that's a little trick I can teach some of our newer players. Now, the next powers we're going to look at are our science powers. And some of these are self-explanatory, so I'm moving through them really quickly. Then we have our science team up first, which is going to give a little bit of regen to our shields. It's going to remove science debuffs such as subnucleonic-based effects and the debuff that they apply to you. Have our hazard emitters, which is a heal over time effect, as well as it's going to grant some temporary damage resistance rating, and it's going to purge certain damage over time effects, such as Borg plasma fires, if you've got hit by their torpedoes. The next thing we have here is our Gravity Well 1. Now, the real strength to our Gravity Well here as a tank isn't per se going to be the exotic damage it's going to do. The reason we're using this particular power is it's going to let us control the battlefield a little bit better. This is going to get the enemy's attention. Now, although our main source of damage isn't going to be the exotic damage, that exotic damage that it's going to do is going to help us in terms of our threat generation. Because our Gravity Well 1 is what is considered a zero-distance power. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term of a zero-distance power, that basically means, as far as the enemy is concerned, you're right on top of them, because the damage it's doing is right on top of them. So, if you fire this power off at the minimum range of, say, 9.9 kilometers, as far as the enemy's concerned, you're right next to them, even if you're not in reality, because that's where the damage is being dealt to them. For our final science power, we have the Transfer Shield Strength. Now, this can be used on yourself to get a bit of shield resistance as well as shield healing, or it can be thrown on allies. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Now, getting into our tactical powers, this is when we kind of start getting the enemy's attention a little bit. Now, our tactical team is something that can be used offensively or defensively. It's going to buff our energy weapons a little bit and our projectile weapons a little bit while it's active. It's also going to distribute our shields automatically. So it's basically a free distribute shields as well. Now, it can be used offensively in the sense that you want to buff the damage, and it can be used defensively to redistribute your shields and also purge things like boarding party. It just depends on what way you need to use it. Now, getting into our firing modes, I'm saving our Delta for last because of how significant of a power it is. Your Fire at Will 3 is basically going to let you do some AoE damage with your beams, as well as triggering certain traits that we have. Now, this is going to basically let you smack virtually anything within range with a beam, with our beam weaponry. Our Torpedo Spread 1 is going to basically load up a bunch of torpedoes and fire them out at certain enemies that are within range and deal a little bit more damage. So basically an AoE torpedo attack or area of effect. Our Cannon Scatter Volley in this case is basically going to be the same thing. Since it's our turret, we're not going to have to worry about the range as much. But we have our Scatter Volley on here mainly to take advantage of our turret. We wanted to have the turret in this instance to get that extra category 2 bonus. Now, the reason I waited to explain Delta is because of how significant of a power this is going to be to you as a tank. Now in this instance we're using Delta 1. Now if you can get a higher rank of Delta and you want to, then by all means go for it. That's even better for you. Now our attack pattern Delta, when it's used on us, it's going to, if something shoots us, then they're going to debuff themselves for a minus 30 all damage resistance rating for the 5 seconds. Each additional time they shoot us, it's going to refresh that debuff on them. And at the same time, it's also going to give us a plus 30 all damage resistance rating for 15 seconds. So that is something to keep in mind. Now your Delta, if you're not really getting hit a lot, you might consider holding off on this a little bit, unless you just want it for all of the extra buffs that are going to be activated. Now, your Delta is also going to trigger your Delta Prime in this instance. It's also going to trigger some of your other traits. It's going to trigger your Adakukans as well, which is going to basically mean potentially an additional 300% threat gen while this power is active. So between your threatening stance, which you want to have on all the time, that's 300% threat gen. If you've got Attract Fire, that's an additional 100% threat gen. So you're looking at 400 there. With your 3 copies of Adakukan, or just 2, you're looking at about 600 to 700% threat gen there. And then when you take into account your History Will Remember, you're looking at close to 900 to 1000% threat generation. So you can stack it up to pretty insane levels. But anyways, I know I kind of rambled a little bit and whatnot, but again, kind of the first video in 2019 you guys may end up seeing. Wanted to make sure that I got the information to you guys, because this is a fairly controversial ship. I want people to understand not just what's on the ship, but how I'm using it too. And you guys are going to see some of this stuff in action in our runs in our Beta Thoradar and in our Chapori run. And then once we get to our final thoughts segment, we're going to be looking at as well some of the final thoughts on the ship. We're going to look at some of the numbers with it. Now, one thing I will say, and you guys are probably going to hear me comment on this later in the video, is this is one of those ships that will take just a little bit of getting used to fly. Once you get used to it, it's actually not that bad. It was actually not as bad as I thought it was. But for now, folks, we will be right back. And we're going to take a gander at our Beta Thoradar and Chapori runs and give final thoughts. See you folks in a bit. Alrighty guys, one other thing in the course of editing the video that I forgot to go over, and this is a big dumb on my part, is the set bonuses for the Kobali set as well as our Kobali Warp Core. Arguably the most important items on the ship, give or take. Now, I'm going to rectify that really quickly instead of having to reshoot the entire thing just to cover this. So we'll tack this on after the intro and stuff. Now, what makes our Kobali Core so potent is actually the benefits that it gives you. Specifically, the shield capacitor being one of the big things. Now, the Warp Core itself, along with the regenerative integrity field, it comes from the Kobali Samsar. If you're coming in after the anniversary event where this was initially given away, or you don't have access to it, or are coming in after the fact, then you're going to have to acquire this on PC from the Phoenix boxes. Console players can still get that, I believe, by saving up enough reward points, which is going to be the account unlocked version of the ship, which I'm going to highly advise for you guys if you can get it. Now, for this particular Warp Core, what makes it so potent is it grants a lot of healing effects and gives some pretty decent damage boosting effects and threat gen effects by extension. Now, this particular Warp Core is going to give some hull restoration. It's going to give a bit of extra maximum shield power and additional shield power. So that's going to be some potential damage reducing benefits there. And what makes it so great is this is, again, one of those rare items that touches base on all three categories. A bit of damage reduction in the form of the shield power, and a bit of healing in terms of the whole restoration and extra aux power it gives, as well as damage increases through the amp mod and the weapons to shields mod. So, and by extension, threat generation off of that as well. Now, what makes some of the stats on the core desirable is the amp mod. You get a 3.3% all damage per subsystem with 75 power or more. So each of your power levels that goes above 75, you'll get an additional 3.3% all damage tacked on. So that is a Category 1 buff. Now, it's not the highest amount ever, but considering how easy it can be to get additional power, this can be pretty nice to have and add up really quickly, actually. So that's a very nice thing to have. Then you have your built-in weapons, or your weapons to shield mod, that pretty much all warp cores get at Epic. And this means it's going to add 7.5% of your weapon power to your shield power as a bonus. And that's free power that you get. Now, this is also going to stack with your shield power to aux. So you're getting 7.5% of shield power to your aux as a bonus. So this is going to give you quite a bit of extra power. Now, the capacitor is probably the most potent thing, or is the most potent thing on this score. It's a 5 kilometer thing that it sends it out in, and it gives a pretty hefty amount of shield regen to nearby allies, as well as 15 shield power, and it also buffs you as well. It also affects you, and it's a very potent shield regen that can be used in a pinch. Depending on how high your shield capacity is, this can outright restore your shields to full. Now, getting into these set bonuses, we have our 2-piece, which is hull regeneration as our HP gets lower, and that's going to go up the more damaged we get, so that is it's a pretty decent buff already, but that's going to get even better as you start dipping lower. Then we have our 3-piece bonus, which is when we're at 25% or less, we get 15,000 temporary HP for 15 seconds, and that can occur once every 2 minutes. Now, the 2-piece and the 3-piece aren't the most potent things out there. So instead, we're going to look at our 4-piece bonus here, which is it's a 5 kilometer sphere, can affect myself and up to 19 other people. 2-minute recharge. To you and nearby allies for 15 seconds, you gain 20% of incoming energy damage. It's healing. Maximum of 20 procs per second. Always heals between 100 damage and 20,000 damage. Now, assuming you get all of the procs, assuming you get all 20 procs per second, and assuming you get the maximum of 20,000 per proc, this can heal you for potentially close to 6 million points of damage. So if you've got this up, it's going to be very, very hard for them to kill you. Now, if you don't have access to the Samsar, then I'm going to strongly recommend considering something like the Soul Defense set instead. Reason being is the Kobali set, it's one of those ones, in my opinion, that it can sometimes be an all or nothing in terms of how potent the benefits are. Just my personal opinion on that, though. But anyways, I did want to touch base on the set bonuses really quickly for you guys to help you understand why I picked this certain set. But now, officially, we're getting into our Beta Thar and Chapori runs. And for those of you on my channel, as we wait on this epic loading screen, we have a Timberwolf with us out there.
What up?
So, I mentioned this in the intro a little bit, but on his channel, you guys get to see where I screwed up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
a little bit of comedy for you guys. You'll probably be seeing some of this stuff later on his channel. So, let's kick some Patowski.
And the fun thing is you're not going to see this. You see his screw up on my video for a previous one. I'm using a different build right now. I think he knows which one I'm doing now.
I believe so. I think so, anyway. everybody out there and everything, like I say, this is... You guys will be seeing this on my channel, probably before you see my massive screw-up on his, depending on how our release schedules go. But I was actually surprised once I got all the kinks in the build worked out. It's actually not as bad of a ship as I was expecting it to be. Definitely going to take some getting used to with the 3.5 layout, which at the time of filming this is still the only ship in the game to have that kind of a build. But once you get used to that, you're pretty much good to go. Might help if I throw a taunt out for you there.
Might help slightly. They do not like me right now.
That is one of the things about Beta Thorador as to why we like to do this one.
Here, I'm going to lower my threat for you.
Is we can go into ISAs, we can do stuff like that on Advanced, but we've actually discovered that, at least for what we do, that the Beta Thorador runs, the Chapori runs you guys see, actually give us far better results.
Well, it's not just that, they become more of a challenge.
That too. So your numbers that you're going to see in a place like this are going to be fairly different from what you may see in an ISA. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just where the difficulty breaks down and all that sorts of stuff. Ooh. Done a lot quicker than I thought we would be.
Yeah. One of those things, Beta Thorador really gives you a challenge. Even more so than Chapori.
Yep. Alright, so we got done with our Beta Thorador. That actually went fairly quickly. For this particular segment, we're looking at about maybe 2.5, 3 minutes as far as the actual recording goes. And that's just based off what I see on the local recorder here that I use for most of this. But for those of you on my channel, we're going to come back and do our Chapori run. We actually filmed this after our Chapori run, so you're going to get to see it in the reverse order and get to see a little bit of a preview for some stuff coming up on Timber's channel, most likely. But we hope you enjoy this and the ship. But after our Chapori run here in just a moment, we're going to come back for some final thoughts on the ship. We're going to break down our parse a little bit more, and yeah, just kind of go from there. But we will be right back.
Alright guys, well, going over this Polaron build, Blade is back, and one thing he was talking about, you know, the last video you saw phasers, apparently he had some things that were kind of messed up with his build, so probably not the best accurate view of what he's doing. So this run is what we're hoping to see on his channel for his tank run. But for me, it's all about them Polaron cannons. So let's just see how this is going to work.
Long story short, folks, yeah, you'll get to see the screw up on Timber's channel for certain from his perspective. But for me personally, just if you've ever had one of those instances where nothing goes right with the build, that was definitely one of those times. It also doesn't help that I'm not used to this ship either.
Yeah, that probably didn't help. Oh, that destroyer is going to die.
Going around for a pass on that other group.
Alright, power to shields.
Oh, they do not like me.
Good, I want them to not like you.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't think they like either of us at this point.
Doesn't matter, they need to like you less. Alright. Get on target, Blade. We got work to do.
Basically, folks, this is one of the few times I'm happy to say they want to punch me in the face over him.
Ain't that the truth?
Shiitake mushroom.
Okay, so they do not like me right now.
And let's get a Delta.
Oh, we're in the finals. Alright, got it.
Okay, so that definitely felt a lot smoother on my end.
Once again, piloting issues for me, but that's just me getting used to cannons. So, let us see how this looks. Alright, well, like I said, not the greatest. So we almost added a full minute compared to the other run because of hiccups. 160k looks like for Polaron cannons, 44 for our buddy Blade. Good thing is that he was actually taking threat this time. He had 66% of the attacks, or 73% of the attacks, 66% of the damage. For me, I just didn't have the damage potential. It looks like I was just hovering. But that's what it is. Dual Polaron cannons were doing 32.6k. The Pizu Polaron dual cannon was doing 18. The Morphogenic did another 18 under spread. So it worked out. I had a decent target debuff of 126%. A max one hit of 110k that came from the Morphogenic Polaron array for overload. So it's not that bad. Could it be better? Probably. Like I said, it felt a little sluggish. I was probably out of position a few times, but 160k for Polaron cannons is not bad, all things considered. It's probably not the best, and there's probably ways that I could enhance that. But this is just a rough sketch. I mean, I'm getting 160, so that is pretty decent. That's all the time I got, guys. Until next time, this is Timberwolf, and I'm signing off.
Alrighty, guys, now that we've taken a look at our Beta Thoradar and our Chapori runs, hopefully you guys can kind of see how the ship handles and everything. Like I said in our Beta Thoradar and Chapori runs, the ship is one that it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you do that, it's actually not that bad. It's actually a fun little ship, and definitely has its uses. And this is one that actually performed a lot better than what I was thinking that it would. Now for this particular ship, let me bring our parson over here. Alright, now our resident Timberwolf, as you saw, was kind enough to help us out with this, as well as testing some of his stuff. Now you can see some of our numbers here. We did about 44k DPS. Now keep in mind this is in a Chapori Elite that we're testing this on. So, not going to be directly translatable always to an ISA, but that's still fairly significant for an elite patrol. Now you can see some of our damage breakdowns here. Obviously Timberwolf managed to crank out a bit more damage, quite a bit more damage. But if you look at our attacks in and our damage in, we out-threaded him big time, which is your main goal as a tank. Even if you don't deal the most damage, you want to make sure that as a tank, you're the one getting shot at more often than the rest of your group. You want to make sure the enemy's focus is on you and not them, because then that frees up the rest of your group to do what they do best and wreck face. Now in this particular instance, you can see some of the amount of healing that we had. You can see some of our critical chances, whatnot. You can see Timberwolf did very, very well for himself in this instance. And you can see we had about a little shy of 1.45 million in terms of damage in. So 1,440,000. No, that's 885. I did that wrong. In terms of damage in, and we had 73.11% of the attacks in. So that means we were pulling about 73% of the threat, which is what we want to see in cases like this. Now let's go ahead and do the combat analysis reports. Give this just a moment to pop up, and let's drag this in from off screen. Alrighty, now looking at some of our numbers here. You can see how, if you're curious about the damage, you can see how some of our pets did. You can see how some of our various weapons did. And most of our damage in this instance was from our Tetrion Beam Arrays under Fire at Will 3. Alright, now let's get into our healing, because this is, in my opinion, where the rubber meets the road for a lot of tanks, because it's your survival that's at stake here. Now you can see here our energy refrequencer, like I was saying at the start of the video, can actually heal more than a hazard emitters in this instance, and in this case it did, big time. Over the course of the run, our energy refrequencer, words hard, healed us for 226k damage, a little over 226k, almost 227, and had a 1129.86 heals per second. So this actually out-healed our regenerative integrity field, our reactive nanite screen, and our some of our other powers, such as our hazard emitters, our transfer shield strength, our science team, all of that. So that's kind of the way our heals broke down here. I hope you guys enjoyed this and whatnot as much as I did making it for you folks. I know I'm a little behind on some of the stuff I wanted to get out there for you guys, but hopefully that should be taken care of pretty soon. But anyways, folks, for now, this is Captain Blade J52, and I'm signing off.